When my wife Maria and I bought our dream home on Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey, it felt like we had won the lottery. Surrounded by sprawling oak trees and perfectly manicured lawns, the house had a quiet, old-world charm that promised a peaceful life away from the city. Our two boys, 5-year-old Drake and 3-year-old Logan, were ecstatic, running wild in the massive backyard. For us, this was the perfect place to build our future. Everything seemed just right. The first few days were a blur of unpacking and meeting the neighbors. Everyone was friendly. A kind, elderly couple, a large family with teenagers, a quiet, single woman, and they all seemed to take a keen interest in us, as if they had been waiting for our arrival. They would wave and smile, "Welcome to Westfield." But beneath their warm greetings, I noticed a penetrating curiosity in their eyes that made me a little uneasy. We brushed it off as normal small-town curiosity. Then came the first letter. It was a Saturday, and I found a cream-colored envelope in our mailbox addressed to the new owners. I handed it to Maria, expecting a friendly welcome note. But as she opened it, the smile on her face faded. Inside, a typed note sent a chill down my spine. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched in the 1960s. "It is my time now," the letter began. We looked at each other, our hearts pounding. Who was this person? The note grew even more sinister. "The windows help me. I am so glad that your children are running around and playing in the back. They are beautiful." The letter knew our children's names, Drake and Logan, which we hadn't shared with anyone yet. We felt a sickening knot form in the pits of our stomachs. We called the police. They were kind, but not particularly concerned. They told us it was likely a harmless prank by a local, maybe a disgruntled neighbor who didn't like newcomers. They advised us to be careful. We tried to go about our lives, but the normalcy was gone. Every time Drake and Logan played in the yard, I couldn't shake the feeling of an unseen pair of eyes watching them. Our home no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a fishbowl. Every flicker of a light, every meal we cooked, every moment became a potential detail for an unseen observer. Then the second letter arrived. There was no name on the envelope, just our address. A foul, sickly sweet odor emanated from it. Inside, the typed message was even more direct. "I know what you had for dinner on Tuesday. I know what happens on your back porch. Are you aware that this house is hungry? It wants new blood." The second letter plunged us into a state of panic that went beyond simple fear. Maria was frantic, her voice trembling as she said, "We have to leave. Right now." The foul stench from the letter clung to our hands, a constant, sickening reminder of the unseen presence outside. I tried to stay rational to talk her down, but inside my own mind was screaming the same thing. This was no longer just a house, it was a trap. I called the police again. This time a detective showed up, but his demeanor was dismissive. He listened to our story with a bored expression, glancing at his watch. He suggested we were stressed from the move, that it was probably a harmless prank. He treated our terror like a common cold, a nuisance he wanted to get rid of. His lack of concern left us feeling more isolated than ever, completely on our own. For the next few days, we lived on the edge. I installed cameras around the perimeter of the house, but they captured nothing but shifting leaves and stray dogs. The watcher moved like a ghost, an expert at remaining unseen. At night, I would stand at the window, staring into the impenetrable darkness, waiting for something, anything. But there was only silence. It was a silence that felt heavier and more menacing than any noise. Then, one night, Maria woke me up, her body shaking. "Listen," she whispered, her voice barely audible. From the backyard, a low murmur rose. It sounded like a hushed conversation, a slow, sibilant whisper. I crept to the window and strained my eyes, but there was nothing to see in the blackness. Still, the whispering was unmistakable, a chilling sound that seemed to come from right below our balcony. It wasn't a person speaking, it was a voice, detached and disembodied, speaking to the house itself. My heart hammered against my ribs. He wasn't just watching from afar anymore. He was here, on our property. The next morning, we found the third letter. This time it was addressed to us by name, with a drawing on the front. It was a crude sketch of our children playing in the backyard. Underneath, a message was scrawled. "They are so beautiful, aren't they? Will they grow up in this house? Or will the house grow up with them?" That picture, that question, was the final straw. It was no longer about a property. It was about our kids. Our sanctuary had become a hunting ground. With every piece of mail, the watcher had taken more of our sanity, more of our feeling of security. We looked at each other and knew what we had to do. We would leave. We would abandon our dream home and the terror that lived with it. We were packed and ready to go when we found a fourth letter in the mailbox. It was thicker than the others. Inside was a picture of our wedding day, and underneath the words, "You are leaving my home. This is not good. I have a special gift for you." The wedding photo sent a fresh wave of ice-cold dread through me. How did he get that? It was a private moment, a memory we cherished. The words, "I have a special gift for you," felt like a final, terrifying twist of a knife. My mind raced, trying to figure out what kind of gift a monster like this would leave. Maria and I frantically searched the house, our fear escalating with every empty corner. Finally, in a small, out-of-the-way nook on the floor of Drake's playroom, I found it, a small wrapped parcel. My hands were shaking as I unwrapped it. Inside was an old key on a rusted keyring. Attached to the keyring was a small tag with a single word scribbled on it. Attic. My blood ran cold. The attic key. We didn't have a key to the attic door, and it had been locked and sealed since we moved in. The sickening realization hit me. He had been inside. He had a key. The watcher had been living with us, not just watching from across the street. Against Maria's frantic pleas, I climbed the small ladder to the attic door. The key fit perfectly. As I turned it, the old wood groaned, and the door creaked open with a sickening sound. The air was thick with dust and the smell of something old and forgotten. Using my phone's flashlight, I swept the beam across the dusty floor and the stacks of old boxes. In a corner, on top of a weathered crate, something caught my eye. It was a small, leather-bound diary. I snatched it and scrambled down the ladder. Maria watched me with wide, terrified eyes as I opened the first page. It was a day-by-day log, written in a cramped, precise hand. "Today, Drake played with a ball in the afternoon," the first entry read. I flipped the page. "Maria wore a red dress today," read another. My stomach lurched. As I kept flipping, the entries became a chilling chronicle of our lives. "They ate pizza tonight." The youngest child cried at 3 a.m. They had a fight in the kitchen over bills. It was a meticulous record of our daily life, written from the perspective of someone who had been observing our every move, from within the walls of our own home. The last page held a chilling message, with a name scrawled below it, almost completely faded. That was it, the final unbearable piece of the puzzle. The watcher was not a neighbor. He was a ghost, a presence that had been lurking in our home, a part of the house itself. That day, we abandoned everything. We didn't sell the house. We just left it and never looked back. We're in a new city now, in a new home. But we still feel him sometimes. When a shadow flickers across the window or a floorboard creaks in the middle of the night, we look at each other, and we know. The watcher wasn't just in the house. He was in our minds, and he would watch us forever. When my wife and I bought this house, we thought our new life in this quiet Pennsylvania suburb was off to a perfect start. With its big trees and peaceful streets, our home felt like a dream. It had a huge yard and a tidy, quiet atmosphere. But the house right next to ours was odd, old and completely boarded up. We heard it had been empty for years, the previous owners having left abruptly, but no one knew why. We figured it would sell eventually, and we'd get new neighbors. For the first few weeks, everything was fine. Then, late at night, I started waking up to a strange noise coming from the empty house next door. It sounded like someone dragging heavy furniture across the floor. At first, I thought it was just mice or some animal, but the sound was so loud and distinct it seemed like someone was actually throwing things around inside the house. My wife would say, "It's an old house. It's bound to make noises." But I knew it wasn't normal. One night, the noise got much worse. It wasn't just dragging sounds anymore. It was scratching against the wall, the shared wall of our bedroom. It sounded like someone was digging their nails or some sharp object into the drywall. We were too scared to even look at each other, just lying there with our eyes closed, pretending we couldn't hear it. Slowly, the sounds began to creep into our house. One afternoon, while I was working on my laptop, the door to my study slammed shut. I jumped out of my skin. There was no wind, no reason for it to close. I opened it and went back to work, but within 5 minutes, it slammed shut again, just as hard. This started happening often. It felt like our own belongings were moving around on their own. The next day, a new horror began. A foul, rotting smell. It was as if something was decaying. The odor seemed to originate from the empty house next door, but it seeped into every corner of our home. We opened all the windows and sprayed air fresheners, but nothing worked. The stench felt like it was coming through the walls. It was as if an invisible connection had been established between our house and the one next to it, and some evil force was using it to reach us. That very night, as we were having dinner, a loud crash came from my son's room. We ran in to find the lamp on his table shattered on the floor, but no one had been in the room. In that moment, it became crystal clear. This was not a normal phenomenon. The evil force that had been trapped in the empty house next door had now crossed the threshold and was inside our home. This was just the beginning. The lamp breaking on the floor left a scar on our minds that never healed. From that point on, every day brought a new horror. Every night, the sound of moving furniture would begin. The cabinet doors in the kitchen would fly open, and we'd hear the water running in the upstairs bathroom, even when no one was there. The smell was the worst part. That foul, decaying odor became a part of our family. It wasn't just in our house. It was spreading outside. One of our neighbors came over and asked, "Did something die in your house? There's a terrible smell coming from this direction." Hearing that confirmed our worst fears. It wasn't our imagination. The neighbors could feel it too. We realized this evil force wasn't content with just our house. It wanted to consume the entire neighborhood. One night, we heard a strange sound coming from our son's room. We crept in to find his toy cars rolling around on the floor by themselves. We were paralyzed with fear. The cars were bumping into each other as if an invisible hand was pushing them. From that point on, the physical assaults began. My wife, Maria, was walking down the stairs one day when she suddenly felt a push. She lost her balance and nearly fell, and only my quick reaction saved her. She said, "Someone touched me." My body went completely cold. We knew this was no ordinary ghost. It wanted to hurt us. At night, when the smell was at its worst, we would both hear whispers calling our names. It was as if someone was right next to our ears, saying, "You're in our home," or "Get out." The mental torment was unbearable, robbing us of sleep and sanity. We were physically and emotionally broken. We couldn't live like this anymore. I decided to see a local priest. He listened to my story carefully, and in his eyes I saw not disbelief but a kind of apprehension. He told me, "You're not alone. These events are rare, but not impossible." He came to our house, performed some rituals, and sprinkled holy water. But this only made things worse. After he left, a horrifying scream echoed through our home like a wounded animal. Later that night, I found deep scratches on my back. The evil force had not taken kindly to the priest's visit. We knew we were facing a battle that was not just physical, but spiritual. After the priest left, the worst of the events began. In the middle of the night, my wife's screams woke me up. She dragged me to the kitchen, where knives were floating in the air. I shook with fear as I quickly put them away, realizing this evil entity now wanted to end our lives. The occurrences became more frequent. Our bed sheets were torn to shreds, we'd hear loud pounding on the doors, and most horrifyingly, the spirit began mimicking our family members' voices. It would say, "Dad, I'm scared," in my son's voice, and when I went to him, its laughter would echo in the room. The nightmare was no longer confined to our home. The foul smell and the strange noises had now reached the neighbors. They would look at us with fear, knowing something was terribly wrong. I overheard our elderly neighbor talking on the phone saying, "The air around that house feels so heavy and cold." We were not alone. This terror was engulfing the entire neighborhood. With no hope left, we contacted a team of paranormal investigators. They listened to our story and set up various instruments in our house. Their equipment showed abnormal readings and drastic drops in temperature, and their recording devices picked up muffled whispers for which they had no explanation. They confirmed that this was no ordinary haunting, but a powerful evil entity that had taken up residence in our home. The team brought in an exorcist. He told us that a tragic event had occurred in the neighboring house, trapping a spirit there. A powerful evil force had joined that spirit and entered our home. We decided to perform an exorcism to drive out the entity. When the special prayers began, our entire house seemed to shake. Furniture was thrown across the room, things on the walls shattered, and we heard a terrifying, inhuman shriek. It felt as if something was trying to rip our home apart. The screaming continued for several minutes before everything suddenly went silent. For the next few days, we waited in fear, but no more strange things happened. The foul smell slowly disappeared. Finally, we were at peace. We left that house and moved somewhere else. We may be at peace now, but the memories of that horror have never left us. To this day, when I wake up at night and look at my son's room, I still feel as though those terrifying days are haunting us. And when I walk past an old house, a shiver runs down my spine at the thought that some evil force inside might be waiting for its next new family. My wife Sarah and I have lived in this house for 5 years. It's our own little piece of the world in a quiet suburb just outside of New York. This house isn't just a house to us. It's our safe haven, our own private world. We both work long hours, and this home is where we find peace. So when strange things started happening, we didn't pay much attention at first. It started with small things. I was certain I had closed a kitchen cabinet door, but the next morning it was slightly ajar. I asked Sarah, "Did you get up to get a snack last night?" She said, "No, I didn't do anything." We chalked it up to our own forgetfulness, but it kept happening. Then I found one of my shoes, which I had left on the shoe rack in the middle of the living room. "Did you take my shoe into the living room?" I asked Sarah, and she looked at me like I was crazy. Why would I do that? From then on, we started arguing about these little things, each of us blaming the other. The small inconsistencies were causing a quiet tension between us. Then one morning, I found a damp towel on the bathroom floor. It wasn't ours. It was a brand new towel. Sarah said, "I didn't buy that." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about forgetfulness. Something else was going on. For the first time, the idea that a stranger was in our home crossed my mind. Our dog, Max, also started acting strangely. He's usually very calm, but for the past few days he would suddenly start barking in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling as if someone was hiding there. His terrified expression made my heart pound. When he stared at the ceiling and barked, I could almost feel a presence above my head, a silent breath I shouldn't be hearing. One night, I went to the kitchen for a glass of water and heard a faint, muffled creak. It sounded like an old floorboard shifting, coming from the crawl space between our ground floor and the ceiling. My body went cold with fear. I crept back to our bedroom without waking Sarah. The next morning, I found my laptop charger in a different spot than where I had left it. I was now certain. Someone was living in our home. I came up with an idea. I ordered a small camera, one that would be hidden from view. I planned to set it up near our bedroom. I had to know what was happening in our house when we were asleep. A sense of dread washed over me. I felt like this was a decision I should have made a long time ago. I set up the small hidden camera near our bedroom. Night after night, Sarah and I would fall asleep, but all I could think about was that someone was sharing our space. My sleep was filled with anxiety. Max, our dog, would stay up all night, constantly looking up at an empty spot on the ceiling, his eyes wide with fear. The sight of his terrified face was more than I could handle. The next morning, my hands were shaking as I pulled the memory card out of the camera and plugged it into my laptop. I hoped I was wrong, that I would see nothing. But what I saw was the most horrifying thing I've ever witnessed. The video started normally. It was 2 a.m. We were all asleep. Suddenly, I saw a shadow move. A floorboard in our kitchen slowly lifted, and a man emerged from underneath. He quietly walked into our kitchen, opened the fridge, and ate our food. He made a coffee with my coffee maker and poured it into one of our cups. My breath hitched. The video showed him using our bathroom and our towels. Then he went to the laundry room, where he picked out one of my shirts and a pair of my pants, put them on, and looked at himself in the mirror. His behavior was completely normal, as if he were in his own home. He wasn't stealing anything. He was simply living our life. The dirt on his clothes and his face made it clear he had been living here for a long time. Watching the video, a wave of fear and disgust washed over me. But the thing that terrified me the most was when he walked to our bedroom door, stood there, and just stared. He knew where we were. He knew everything about us. He was so close, and we had no idea. I screamed. Sarah ran over to me and asked, "What's wrong?" I couldn't look her in the eye. For all this time, a stranger had been watching our lives, and we had been blaming each other. I couldn't stay for another second. "We have to leave now," I told Sarah. When she asked why, I just said, "I'll tell you later. Let's just go." We woke up the kids and got into the car. As we drove away, I looked back at the house and saw a faint light flicker in the attic window. A shadow was looking down at us. He knew we had discovered him. He was watching us leave. As we drove away from the house, tears streamed down my face. I knew our dream home was no longer ours. The shadow looking down from that dark attic window had changed our lives forever. We stayed in a hotel, but I couldn't relax. Every sound, every creak of a door made me jump. I felt like he had followed us. He could be anywhere, in another attic, under the floorboards of another house. The fear had no address, which made it even more terrifying. The next morning, we called the police and showed them the camera footage. The officers initially didn't believe us. One of them asked, "Are you sure this isn't some family drama?" I showed him the laptop, and his face went pale as he watched the video. They rushed to our house and found a crawl space under the kitchen floor. Inside, they found a makeshift bed, food wrappers, and a collection of our personal belongings, my old shoes, a discarded diary of Sarah's. He hadn't stolen anything, he had just collected our things to make them his own. The police investigation revealed a shocking truth. The man was a distant relative of the house's previous owners. He had been institutionalized for a mental illness and had a copy of the old floor plans, which included the hidden attic and crawl spaces. He believed the house was his and that we were just visitors. We never returned to the house. We sold it through a real estate agent. We didn't need any of our belongings back. Everything in that house felt poisoned. We've moved to a new place, but the fear has never left. Even now, every sound makes my heart race. When a door slams, I jump. And when I wake up in the middle of the night, I silently check on Sarah, just to make sure she's there. Our sense of safety is gone forever. We learned that the biggest fear isn't of something supernatural, but of a seemingly normal person who could be hiding just out of sight. That secret dweller might be in another house now, claiming another family's life as their own. And for those of us who survived, we can never forget. I still feel sometimes like a shadow is watching from my window, and that every moment of my life is being documented by someone unseen. We always thought of this Pennsylvania neighborhood as a quiet and safe place. Everyone knew everyone, and everyone had a friendly smile for one another. Our neighbor, Mark, was the complete opposite. He was a quiet man in his 40s who didn't say much. If he saw you, he'd just give a slight smile and a nod before carrying on. He spent most of his time in his garage, fixing old things or cutting wood. From inside his garage, we'd often hear the sounds of saws or other tools, but we always thought it was his hobby and never bothered to ask. On the other side of us lived Mr. Davies. He was a retired, cheerful man who always had a smile on his face and loved talking to everyone. His garden was beautiful, and he would work in it every morning and afternoon. He was, without a doubt, the best neighbor you could ask for. At first, the sounds from Mark's garage were normal, the whir of a saw, the clang of a hammer. But over the last few months, the noises changed. Interspersed with the sound of the saw, we'd hear a muffled scream or a cry of pain. I'd try to rationalize it, telling myself it was just a mechanical sound, but a knot of unease would form in my stomach. I would ask my wife, "Why does Mark's garage make such strange noises?" She'd just smile and say, "Oh, it's nothing, he probably just got a new tool." But that feeling of dread wouldn't go away. Last Tuesday night, around 2 a.m, I was asleep when a piercing scream jolted me awake. It was a human scream, and it was close. My wife woke up terrified, and we both sat there frozen, listening. The scream stopped abruptly, replaced by a terrifying grinding sound, the sound of a chainsaw. In the middle of the night, that sound was enough to freeze my blood. My hands and feet went cold. I slowly and carefully pulled back the curtains and looked outside. It was a dark night, but a light was shining from Mr. Davies' backyard. I saw a shadowy figure dressed in black, moving around in the garden. He was holding a chainsaw, and the noise it made seemed to shake the whole street. I was too terrified to move. The figure slowly took shape. He was wearing a white mask, the kind from the horror movie Scream. The eyes of the mask seemed to glow in the darkness. I knew then that this wasn't a normal occurrence. I was petrified as I watched the person with the chainsaw. He was doing something with it, and the sound was just sickening. I couldn't believe my eyes. When he was done, he calmly walked back to his garage, still wearing the mask and holding the chainsaw. He opened the garage door and disappeared inside. That's when it hit me. The monster was living just next door, so close to me and my family. After Mark's garage door closed, my heart was still pounding in my chest. My body was frozen stiff and I couldn't move from the window. My wife came to me and shook me. "What's wrong? What did you see?" I couldn't speak. I could only point a trembling finger towards our neighbor's house. I managed to choke out the words, "Mark, Mark, Mr. Davies." She thought I was dreaming and tried to calm me down, but what I had seen was no nightmare. I was overwhelmed with a mix of disgust and fear. I realized that my normal neighbor, the man who spent his days cutting wood, was a cold-blooded killer. When morning came, I immediately called the police. I was so scared that I could barely speak. All I could manage to say was, "Something happened at Mr. Davies' house." When the police arrived, everyone in the neighborhood peeked out of their windows. Mr. Davies' backyard was a horrifying sight. His rose bushes were torn to shreds, his gardening tools lay broken and scattered, and most terrifyingly, the head of a stone statue he had made in memory of his wife was missing. And blood. Fresh blood was splattered on the rose bushes. My wife and I couldn't look each other in the eye because we both knew who did this. When the police knocked on Mark's door, he opened it with a smile as if nothing had happened. He talked to the police calmly, looking at them with the eyes of an innocent man. When I told the police, "Mark did this," his expression didn't change. He just looked at me with a cold stare, a faint smile on his lips. That smile sent shivers down my spine. It felt like he knew I had seen him, and he was now toying with me. His silent stare and that smile filled my heart with a new kind of terror. The next few days were the most terrifying of our lives. Every morning, Mark would come out of his garage, look at me, and smile. It was a normal smile, but in his eyes was a twisted delight. It was as if he was telling me, I know you saw me, but you can't prove a thing. That mental torture kept me awake night after night. I knew that after killing Mr. Davies, he might be coming for me next. One morning, as I was walking to my car, I saw a flower on the car door. It was a rose from Mr. Davies's garden, the one he had planted for his wife. And on the flower was a red stain. Seeing Mr. Davies's rose on my car, I froze. This was no coincidence. It was a message from Mark. He was telling me that he knew I had seen him and he wasn't going to let me go. From that moment on, our lives became a living hell. My wife and I couldn't sleep at night. Every sound made us jump, and I was sure I could hear a faint saw from Mark's garage. When I would pull back the curtains, I would see Mark staring at my house. But whenever he looked at me, a normal smile would appear on his face, which made me even more scared. It felt like he was playing a psychological game with me. The police were still investigating, but they couldn't find any concrete evidence against Mark. They searched his garage but found nothing suspicious. The blood in Mr. Davies's garden was splattered in such a way that no DNA could be recovered. I told the police about the rose, but they dismissed it as a prank. They said, "You're just under a lot of stress. It was probably some kid." But I knew it wasn't a prank, it was a message from Mark to me. I couldn't take this mental torture anymore. One night I decided to take matters into my own hands. With a small knife in my hand, I carefully made my way to Mark's garage. There was a small window in one corner. I peeked inside and saw Mark cleaning his saws. But what caught my eye was an old toolbox next to him. Something was sticking out of it. I moved closer and saw a black mask inside. Just then my foot hit a loose piece of wood. A loud creak. Mark looked at me. There was no smile on his face, only a cold, empty stare. He slowly reached for his toolbox, and I knew what he was going to do. I didn't wait for another second. I ran as fast as I could, and behind me, I could hear his terrifying, hoarse laughter. That laugh was the most frightening thing I had ever heard. I somehow made it back to my house and called the police. I screamed into the phone. "I saw it, the mask is in his garage." When the police arrived, I told them everything. They went to Mark's garage and found the mask, along with other evidence connected to Mr. Davies. Mark was arrested. The smile hadn't left his face. He calmly got into the police car, looked at me and said, "What you saw was just the beginning." Even today, I can't forget that day. Mark is in jail now, but whenever I hear an old saw, my heart pounds. When I see a quiet stranger, I wonder if he's wearing a mask. We may have been saved from a monster, but a new kind of fear remains in our hearts. A fear that isn't supernatural, but a twisted human psyche that has robbed us of our sense of normalcy forever. When we moved into this house, it felt like we had found a slice of heaven. Our dream home was in a quiet suburb, away from the city's chaos. My wife Rima, our 5-year-old daughter Neela, and I all loved the place. It was surrounded by beautiful green lawns, a kids' park, and friendly people. The Millers lived right next door, John and Jenny Miller, with their 2 children, Leo and Lisa. They welcomed us with open arms. They seemed so perfect and friendly that we felt like we had known them forever. For the first few weeks, everything was a dream. John would leave for work in his car in the mornings and come back in the evenings. Jenny would tend to her garden, and their kids, Leo and Lisa, were always so quiet. We found it a little strange. While other kids ran around and played, Leo and Lisa would stand still in their front yard. There was no mischief in their eyes, just a strange emptiness. We initially wrote it off as them being shy, but slowly, small things started to make me uneasy. I noticed that Leo and Lisa almost always wore the same kind of clothes, a blue shirt and black pants. One afternoon, while talking with Rima, I happened to look at them. They were standing in the middle of their garden in the same posture, their faces turned towards the sky. They looked like they had been standing like that for hours. I told Rima, "Look, the kids are standing so strangely." Rima said, "They're probably just playing a game." I shook my head, but my mind wouldn't let it go. The fear took root in me one night. It was around 2 in the morning. I had gotten up to use the bathroom when I heard a faint light and whispering from the window. I nervously pulled back the curtain and saw the Miller family in their backyard. But they weren't standing normally. They were in a circle, holding something in their hands, their faces lifted to the sky. Jenny was holding a baby. They weren't talking, but their lips were moving silently. My blood ran cold. This was no normal family ritual. An old memory surfaced. We had met the Millers when we were looking at the neighborhood months ago. I had seen their children then. But what I was seeing now sent a chilling wave through me. Their faces, their height, their clothes, everything was exactly the same. They hadn't grown a single inch. I woke up Rima and whispered, "Did you notice? Their kids haven't grown at all. They looked exactly like this when I first saw them." Rima told me to calm down. "It's your imagination. We're probably just tired and things look strange." But I knew it wasn't my imagination. A horrifying question was creeping into my mind. What are they? Just then, my daughter Neela murmured in her sleep, "Daddy, why don't those children ever get bigger?" After hearing those words from my daughter, I had no more doubts. This was not my imagination. Rima might not have believed me then, but I knew that our seemingly perfect next-door neighbors were hiding a terrifying secret. From that night on, our lives changed. We lived in constant fear. During the day, when the Millers were in their garden, it felt like they were watching us. Their smiles no longer seemed friendly. It felt like they were studying our every weakness. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I attached a recorder to my drone camera and flew it into the Millers' backyard at night. When I watched the footage the next morning, my body froze with fear. The video showed the Millers performing their strange ritual again. They were standing in the middle of the garden, holding black pots and pouring something onto the ground. But the most horrifying part was the children. Leo and Lisa weren't saying a word. They were making the same gestures as their parents. The expression in their eyes was completely empty, as if they were lifeless dolls. What I saw that night was just the beginning. One afternoon, I saw Leo and Lisa staring at our house. They were fixed on our daughter, Neela, who was playing in the yard. Their eyes were devoid of any expression, just a strange stillness. Neela waved at them, but they didn't react. Neela came to me and said, "Daddy, they're not playing with me, they're just staring." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I felt like they weren't just staring, they were watching our daughter. I decided to dig deeper. I searched online for old news about the area. Suddenly, a news report caught my eye. 20 years ago, 2 children had gone missing from a family in this very neighborhood. Their names were Leo and Lisa. Their case was never solved. Their ages and descriptions matched the Millers' children exactly. Everything clicked into place. These kids hadn't grown in 20 years. They weren't human. But what were they? That night, when I looked out the window again, what I saw made my heart feel like it would stop. The Millers' children were standing right at the edge of our property line. They were holding hands, and they were holding something else. When they looked at me, a strange smile appeared on their faces. What they were holding made my blood run cold. They were holding my daughter's favorite doll, and right next to it was a new doll, a doll that looked exactly like my daughter Neela. She was even wearing a blue dress just like Neela's. Seeing that doll that looked just like my daughter, my whole body went cold. I pulled Rima away from the window and hugged Neela tightly. A terrified scream was building in my mind. They want our daughter. I didn't waste another second. I told Rima everything. She didn't believe me at first. Tears streamed down her face. When I showed her the drone footage and the old news clipping, her face went pale and she began to tremble. We made the quick decision to leave the house immediately. We packed a small bag and quietly opened the front door. It was pitch black outside. We ran towards the car. But as we were about to get in, we saw the 4 members of the Miller family walk out of their front door. They had their perfect smiles, but their eyes were empty. Leo and Lisa were holding my daughter's doll and the new one. John Miller calmly approached us and said, "Where are you going?" We thought you were going to stay with us. Our children need a new playmate." His words made my heart leap into my throat. He was talking as if we were part of a game. I put Neela in the car and told Rima, "Get in the car now." I looked into John and Jenny's eyes. Though they looked normal, there was a strange, mechanical emptiness in them. Their eyes didn't seem human, and their children's eyes were completely still, as if they were just following their parents' orders. Their behavior and expressions made me realize that they had been hunting for victims for 20 years. In that moment, I knew they weren't human. They were some sort of beings who took human form to use the lives of normal people like us. I quickly started the car and looked back. The Millers were still smiling, holding the dolls. Without looking back, I drove onto the highway. The only thing on our minds was to escape. We finally made it to a police station where I told them everything. They were skeptical at first, but when I showed them the drone footage, they went with us to our house. But when we got there, the Millers' house was empty. There were no signs of anything. It was as if they had never been there. The police couldn't find them. But we know they're still out there, maybe in a new place, next door to another family. We may have escaped that day, but we can never go back to a normal life. Even today, when a stranger smiles at us, our hearts pound. When a car drives by our house at night, we feel like they're looking for us. Our sense of safety is gone forever. We know they are looking for their next victim, and their next neighbor could be anyone. My name is Zara. I live in a small, quiet neighborhood just west of Los Angeles. My little house and my beloved cat, Leo, were my entire world. Leo wasn't just any cat, he was my best friend. His orange fur was as bright as the California sun, and his deep green eyes held a strange, intelligent gaze. Every morning when I woke up, he would be sitting by my bed, his silent presence a source of immense comfort. We'd play and sleep together, and his gentle purring was enough to melt away all my stress. Leo loved being indoors, so I never had to worry about his safety. He was my everything. Everything was fine until one afternoon when I came home from work and couldn't find him. At first, I wasn't too worried. Maybe he was asleep in some hidden corner or playing hide and seek with one of his toys. I called out his name, "Leo, Leo," but there was no answer. My heart began to pound. I searched every corner of the house, looking under every piece of furniture, but there was no sign of him. The doors and windows were all locked. I couldn't understand how an indoor cat could just disappear. My insides felt hollow, and an unbearable fear began to consume me. I stayed up all night, calling out his name every few minutes. The next morning, I frantically made posters with his picture. I chose a beautiful photo where his eyes were shining brightly. I put my phone number on the poster and started putting them up on every lamppost and notice board in the neighborhood. As I was putting up a poster on one lamppost, I saw Mrs. Clara, a sweet-looking old lady in her 80s with white hair, sitting on her porch across the street doing needlework. She smiled at me, and her smile was so kind that my heart felt a little calmer. She called out, "Your cat is missing, isn't he?" I told her yes. She said, "I've seen him. I'll help you look." For the next few days, Mrs. Clara and I looked for Leo together. She was incredibly calm, but there was a strange coolness in her eyes that I didn't notice at first. She tried to console me, but her words lacked any real emotion. They were just a mechanical display of sympathy. One morning, as I was walking past her house, my eyes fell on a tiny button on the sidewalk, a small piece from Leo's collar. The collar was very rare, and I knew for sure it was his. My heart froze. This couldn't be a coincidence. I realized that Mrs. Clara was pretending to help me, but she might be the reason Leo was gone. My suspicion grew. I started secretly watching Mrs. Clara's house. I noticed that every morning she would go to her garden, but she wasn't tending to flowers or plants. She was working on small mounds of dirt that looked like graves. She would meticulously place leaves and flowers on top of each mound. I also noticed that her house was filled with what looked like lifeless figures of birds and squirrels. Through her bedroom window, I saw a squirrel sitting on her dresser in an odd, stiff pose. It wasn't a toy. It was part of her collection. The number of taxidermied birds and squirrels in her house was unnerving. At one point, I had just dismissed it as a strange hobby, but now it felt like it had a sinister purpose. My obsession with finding the truth began to affect my life. I couldn't sleep at night. I would constantly stare at Mrs. Clara's house, dreading to see a new figure in her windows. My friends thought I was crazy and told me to just get over it. "Zara, it's just a cat. He'll probably come back," they said. But I knew Leo wouldn't be coming back on his own. A horrifying truth had taken root deep in my heart. One evening, I saw Mrs. Clara leave her house for a short drive. I knew this was my only chance. My heart was pounding, but I pushed all my fear and hesitation aside and climbed through a slightly ajar back window into her house. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and dust, with a strange, sweet scent, like formaldehyde. I used my phone's flashlight to guide me. The house was a museum of taxidermy. In her living room, a taxidermied puppy was sitting on the couch, its lifeless eyes staring right at me. I was terrified, but I kept going. I made my way to the basement. It was a workshop, filled with taxidermy tools, jars of preserving fluid, and other chilling equipment. I checked every corner, and with every corner I checked, my fear grew stronger. And then, I saw it. In the middle of the basement, inside a large glass display case, lay my Leo's small body. His green eyes were open, but he was completely still. He was posed as if he was sleeping peacefully. His body was arranged so perfectly that it seemed as if he hadn't suffered at all. A small metal plate beneath the case read, "Leo, Eternal Beauty." I couldn't scream. No sound would come out of my throat. I just stared at him and tears streamed down my face. Next to him were other display cases holding the remains of other neighborhood pets that had gone missing over the years. I finally understood. Mrs. Clara wasn't just an animal lover. She was a collector of living things. She would immortalize them in her collection. She took their lives to make their beauty eternal. I stumbled out of the house, my legs shaking. I called the police immediately and told them everything. When the police retrieved Leo, my heart didn't feel relief or joy. It was filled with disgust. I got Leo back, but his lifeless body made me realize that my best friend was truly gone forever. Mrs. Clara was arrested, but there's no justice for a twisted mind like hers. Even today, when I go outside, I feel like Mrs. Clara's vacant eyes are following me. I now know that some people's quietness makes them more dangerous than anyone else. I double-check my locks every night because I never know when the seemingly harmless neighbor next door will decide that my most precious thing is the next perfect addition to their collection. My name is Ria. I decided to start a new life in an old apartment building, far from the hustle and bustle of New York City. The building was old, but its historic architecture charmed me. I moved into an apartment on the 4th floor. The neighborhood was quiet, offering a sense of peace that I craved. On my very first day, I met my next-door neighbor, Mr. Peterson. He was an elderly, reserved man, with a somber face and a profound emptiness in his eyes. He only said one thing to me: "This building has its own history. Always be careful here." His words created a feeling of unease within me, but I dismissed it as the melancholic rambling of an old man. For the first few days, everything was fine. Then one night I woke up to a strange, silent presence. I opened my eyes and saw a faint, translucent figure standing in the middle of my living room. It was the apparition of a young woman. Her hair was shoulder length, and she wore a white dress. Her eyes were filled with sorrow, and her face held an unexpressed agony. She made no sound, but her every gesture suggested she was trying to say something. She would just stare at me and point with her right hand toward the wall that separated my apartment from Mr. Peterson's. My entire body went cold. It was the first time I had ever experienced a haunting. I was too terrified to scream. I could only watch as tears streamed down my face. Slowly, the figure vanished into thin air like a wisp of fog. Over the next few nights, the same thing happened. The ghost would appear at the same time, stare at me with the same pained expression, and point toward the wall. My fear gradually turned into a mix of terror and pity. It didn't feel like a malevolent spirit. It felt like a desperate cry for help. Driven by a need to understand, I started researching the building's history. I learned that a young woman named Maya, who used to live in the apartment, had died in a car accident years ago. I realized this sad ghost was none other than Maya. But why was she here in my apartment? Why couldn't she just go back to her own home? My unease grew into a deep-seated anxiety. I couldn't sleep peacefully anymore. The fear became so overwhelming that I decided to confront Mr. Peterson. One afternoon, I knocked on his door. He opened it with a sad, knowing look in his eyes. He invited me into his apartment. It was dark and filled with old belongings. "You've seen my daughter, haven't you?" he asked, as if it were a routine question. I told him what I had seen. He showed no surprise, only a deep sorrow. He confessed, "Maya comes to visit me every day, but she is always so sad." His words sent a chill down my spine. "Her soul is stuck between two worlds, and your apartment has become the gate," he explained. He then showed me an old book containing strange incantations and symbols. He confessed, "I performed an ancient ritual to bring her back, but I made a mistake. When I performed the ritual, you had just moved in." His voice was calm, but the madness in his eyes terrified me. He explained that he tried to bind his daughter's soul to a physical object, but because of my presence, her soul became tied to my apartment as well. "She is trying to get back to her home, but she can't," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "To set her free, I need to open the gate completely, and to do that, I need a sacrifice." He revealed that he had been waiting for a new, unsuspecting resident to move in. He had chosen me as a tool to bring his daughter back. My terror was no longer of a ghost. It was of a living, unhinged man who was willing to do anything for his own twisted grief. I was paralyzed with fear. Mr. Peterson slowly extended his hands toward me. The madness in his eyes was something I had never seen before. I tried to scream and run, but he grabbed me with a strength that belied his age. He dragged me into a small, dark room in his apartment. It was filled with Maya's old belongings. On a dressing table, there was a picture of a smiling young Maya, with some dried flowers next to it. Just then, Maya's ghost appeared in the room. But this time, she was not in my apartment. She was in her father's. And she wasn't just pointing. She was screaming silently, her face a mask of absolute terror. I finally understood. She wasn't trying to get home. She was trying to warn me. The ghost wasn't the threat. The ghost was the warning. Mr. Peterson threw me onto the floor. He pulled a small ceremonial knife from his pocket, his face now a rictus of joy. "Today, Eleanor, we will be together again," he shouted. I didn't understand what he meant by Eleanor. As I struggled, my hand hit an old wooden box. It fell open, and I saw a horrifying sight. Inside was a grotesque, macabre effigy of Maya's body. It was her mummified remains, crudely and lovingly preserved by her father. The face of the effigy was a silent scream, its eyes a vacant white. I finally understood why Maya's ghost was so full of agony. Her soul wasn't just trapped, it was tormented by the horrifying reality of her physical existence. I let out a scream of my own. Mr. Peterson lunged at me, but I managed to shove him away and grab a heavy metal candlestick. I swung it at him, and he fell. I scrambled to my feet and ran out of his apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. I called the police from the street. When they entered Mr. Peterson's apartment, they found the gruesome effigy and the ritual tools. Mr. Peterson was taken away. I escaped with my life, but I was forever changed. The horror was not the ghost. The horror was the living man, and the sick, unending grief that turned his own daughter into a trapped, suffering puppet. The image of the effigy and the silent scream of the ghost are forever burned into my mind. I moved out of the apartment, but A part of me believes that I am still living there, haunted by the memory of a father's madness and a daughter's perpetual agony. My name is Laura. I live in a small town in Texas where everyone knows everyone. It's the kind of place where neighbors are more like extended family. My husband, Tom, and our 2 children, 7-year-old Sam and 5-year-old Lily, were my entire world. Sam was a quiet boy who loved to read, while Lily was a little butterfly always running around and playing. Right across the street lived Mr. Jennings, a retired school teacher in his late 70s. He always had a smile on his face, and his relationship with the children was wonderful. Sam and Lily adored him. He often baked them cookies and told them stories. In our neighborhood, we all just called him Grandpa Jennings. His yard was filled with beautiful flowers, and his house always seemed to be full of the happy chirping of birds. Everything was perfect until strange things started happening in our neighborhood. The first incident happened to our neighbors, the Matthews family. Their 6-year-old daughter Emily disappeared from the park. A wave of panic spread through the entire town. The police came, searches began, but Emily was nowhere to be found. Her parents were broken with grief. We all stood by them, but a deep fear began to take hold of our hearts. Nothing like this had ever happened in our quiet town before. A few weeks later, it happened again. This time, the Maxwell's 8-year-old son, Jacob, vanished from his own front yard. This time, our fear was replaced by a kind of disbelief. The police came again, but they found no clues. Neighbors began to look at each other with suspicion. Among us, Grandpa Jennings was the most heartbroken. He loved Emily and Jacob dearly. He worked day and night to find them. He would go door to door with their pictures, collecting information, and was always present at every neighborhood meeting. His kindness touched me. I thought, how can a person be so selfless? My husband Tom and I were extremely worried about our own children. We didn't let them go outside alone. Sam and Lily were scared too. Lily couldn't sleep at night and often had nightmares. Grandpa Jennings would often come over and tell the children stories to calm them down. He would say, "Don't be afraid, I'm here for you." His words gave me some peace, but a small question kept nagging at me. How could 2 children disappear without a trace? No clues, no witnesses. The police were at a dead end. One afternoon, Lily and I were walking past Grandpa Jennings' house. His gate was slightly ajar. Lily was enchanted by his flower garden. She said, "Mom, Grandpa Jennings's flowers are so pretty." She ran inside the gate before I could stop her. I called out, "Lily, don't go inside." But she had already run to the middle of the garden. I went after her and found her standing in front of a large flower bush. She was looking at something. I went closer, and Lily pointed and said, "Mom, there's a little button here." As I picked up the button, my blood ran cold. It was a button from Emily's dress. I was sure of it because after her disappearance, Emily's mother had described her dress, and this button was its most distinct feature. A terrible unease began to gnaw at me. Emily's button right here in Grandpa Jennings' garden. I quickly took Lily by the hand and left his house. My legs were shaking. I told Tom everything. At first he couldn't believe me. He said, "Grandpa Jennings would never do such a thing, he's a good man." But when I showed him the button, his face went pale. He believed me. We decided that before we went to the police, we needed more proof. We were terrified that if Grandpa Jennings was innocent, we would destroy his life. That night, Tom and I started watching Grandpa Jennings's house. We saw that he kept the light on in his basement all night. He was doing something down there, but we couldn't make out what it was. We were too scared to go inside. It felt as if we were staring at an invisible monster. In the dead of night, we went to the back of his house. There was a small window that gave a view into the basement. As we crept closer and looked inside, we saw something that made our blood run cold. Inside the basement, there was an old wooden table. On it were some old dolls and toys. They were Emily's and Jacob's toys. Next to the table, we saw a large trunk. The lid was open, and from inside we could see some old clothes and hair sticking out. They were Emily's and Jacob's clothes and hair. We realized the horrifying truth. Grandpa Jennings had murdered Emily and Jacob. He had hidden their bodies in his basement and had collected their toys and clothes as souvenirs. He was a kind neighbor to us, but inside, he was a monstrous killer. Tom and I immediately called the police and told them everything. When the police entered Grandpa Jennings's house, the looks on their faces were a mixture of shock and horror. They found the remains of Emily and Jacob in the trunk. Grandpa Jennings was arrested without any protest. He just calmly went with the police with the same smile on his face, as if he had done nothing wrong. His eyes held a terrifying emptiness, as if he had no emotions at all. This incident changed our neighborhood forever. We now look at each other with suspicion. We now know that the most quiet and innocent-looking person next door might be hiding a terrible secret within their house. My children no longer sleep peacefully. They always want to be with their parents. We now know that some people's silence makes them more terrifying than anything else. And from now on, I check my door locks twice, because I never know when the seemingly harmless neighbor next door will make my most precious things a part of their dark collection.